listen openly with an open heart, an open mind. Don't always try to get your agenda. Try to think about the other person and put yourself in their shoes, empathize with them. Ask questions, just find out more from the other person. I think that if people listened more to each other in the world, it'd just be such a better place.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the new episode on Transformative Purpose Podcast. We're going to talk about communication today. So we've invited an expert, Hannah, to talk about how to become a more effective communicator in a multinational setting. Welcome on the podcast, Hannah. Apparently, we met 5 years ago at a wedding.
Apparently, Aaron, thank you so much for having me here. It was so funny how we found each other on LinkedIn and found out that we have a very common friend and common connection.
Yeah, and this person happened to be one of our best friends too.
Exactly. I know it really is a small world. And I've also learned that, you live in Hong Kong and I was born in Hong Kong as well. So that was really nice to have that in common.
Yeah, do tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, well, so I'm a communication coach for people who work in multinational companies, and that kind of background started because I've lived all around the world actually. I was born in Hong Kong, lived there until I was 10. I have American family, lived in Australia, and now I live in Italy. So I've been working with people from around the world in multinational settings for many, many years, teaching English. And a couple of years ago, I decided to move into more one-to-one focused coaching that I do now,
Yeah,
focused on communication. Yeah.
yeah. So does someone need to speak perfect English to be a effective communicator, or is that one of the communication myths?
Absolutely not. They do not need to be a perfect communicator in English. No, you know that English is spoken by more people who weren't born as English speakers around the world nowadays. So actually, in business, people speak with more of an international English. And, one of the things that I try to help people realize is that they don't have to be perfect speakers of English to move forward in their careers and to speak in meetings. And once we get over this perfection myth, then we can really move forward with being effective in our communication. Communication is a two-way process. It involves at least two people. So listening is a huge part of that. And becoming a better communicator, we need to improve our listening skills, active listening skills. I know you've written a lot about that, Aaron, in some of your posts on LinkedIn, how
Yeah, someone
important
said we
active
have.
listening is.
Someone said there's a reason why we have 2 ears and a mouth.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are hearing but not listening, aren't they? This different thing. So we need to really focus on being intentional with how we approach listening in a conversation. So that means, going in without distractions, not thinking about, oh, what do I want to achieve from this conversation, but also being open to what the other person wants to achieve. Looking at their body language, is their facial expression actually matching what they're saying? Do they look uncomfortable? Are they folding their arms? And the other thing is just being open-minded about your communication. So being open about what the other person might want to really say to you and not judge them for that.
You mentioned about international English. What
Mm,
is
yeah.
international English and what is English? Is there a difference between the two?
That's such a good question. I think that international English is what people need to use to communicate functionally. So often, in my experience, when English teachers teach English as a language in a language school, they're teaching a lot of like colloquial phrases, idiomatic expressions. So they might teach, "Oh, I want to think outside the box," or um, "It's raining cats and dogs." Okay, these kind of phrases and stuff. But in an international setting, if you're speaking to people who don't know those phrases, right, you're not necessarily going to get your point across. Okay. So the point is that we want to focus on communicating clearly and with our audience in mind. So if you have an international audience in mind, you want to think about using language that the majority of people are going to understand instead of using impressive language, right? Like colloquial expressions.
Because the outcome is quite different, right? I mean, you're not there.
Mhm.
You're there to try to achieve a mutual outcome. You're not there to impress
Mhm.
people.
Exactly, yeah. That is one of the things. People think that they need to be impressive or sound smart by using a lot of also, kind of jargon, big words, right? And even myself as a native English speaker, I don't necessarily know all of the terms that might be related to someone's job. So when you speak to someone, you have to think about, who your audience is, what they might understand or know already.
So you've touched on one of the common myths, which is around perfection.
Hmm.
A lot of people think that we need to be perfect when we communicate in order to be a good communicator, and you think that's actually wrong. What are some of the top three common communication myths that you have come across, and people should really try to stay away from?
Yeah, I think the what another one that is a big mistake people make is trying to talk a lot. So they think that to be a good communicator, they need to talk a lot, they need to talk fast. Um, when actually what we want is to put less effort on our audience, to our audience who's listening to us when we're speaking, they have to process a lot of information. So the better that we can reduce the amount that we talk and reduce the amount of words we use or ideas in one set sentence, for example, the easier it's going to be for our audience to understand us. So we always have to think about the process that our audience goes through in understanding our message and making it shorter and easier for them to get the message. So that's one of the main myths I would say. The other one we talked about was listening. Listening should be more important than speaking. And the third one was about using, let's say, intellectual language or smart, trying to sound smart. At the end of the day, as I said, we always have to think about our audience. So don't think about ourselves and how we sound to others. We want to think about how they're going to get our message, okay? And try and make it the easiest for them to understand.
So you mentioned you used to be a teacher. Now you've
Mhm.
sort of moved away from that. You're doing more sort of one-on-one coaching with individual clients
Mhm.
on how to help them become a better communicator, right? So
Mhm.
how can somebody, so for our listeners on the call, how can they start improving their own communication? Are there books that they need to read, or is it more of a sort of the more practices they get, the better? Should they solicit more feedback from the listeners? What are some of the concrete steps someone can undertake to become better?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it depends on how well you understand where your challenges are. So, I think sometimes if you sit down and you really reflect on where your issues are, you can work on it yourself for sure. So, an example would be to sit down and think about some recent meetings you've had, okay, situation where you're communicating in a group or even a one-to-one basis, and think about what happened during that meeting, okay? Where did the miscommunication happen? Where did I go wrong? Think about then what you need to achieve to overcome that block the next time. So if you were feeling a lack of confidence, okay, think about why. Why did I feel a lack of confidence? Did I feel like I didn't have the right in words to express my ideas? Did I feel like I didn't know how to answer questions that were spontaneous? Okay. And so when you identify the problems you're having, then you can start to work on solutions. So it might be that you need to prepare better for your meetings. You need to spend a bit more time thinking of your ideas first. So that's one way. The other way is you can work with a coach or somebody to help you identify those issues that you're having. And I would say that often it's not about studying or reading more. Often it is about very simple process of identifying your challenges, trying to set some small goals to work on. So let's say next time in my meeting, I want to be more confident. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do A, B, and C. Try it out and then reflect again on your progress. Because communication is live, right? So you can't study it in a book. You have to get there, out there, and actually do it to improve.
Yeah. Yeah, and really learn from those mistakes. And one thing that has been quite helpful to me, not so much on communication, but I think every hiccup that I face in life is to really look at them as lessons learned rather than failure
Mhm.
in itself.
Exactly.
So I try to look at it that way. So another question that I hear a lot is that so for I guess for meetings, for prepared dialogues, those things like you said, we can prepare, we can research for those conversations, right? But a lot of people have challenges with spontaneous, like being put on the spot to answer questions, to think on their feet, right? And
Mhm.
what can, like, for those circumstances, what can those people do?
So there's a few things you can do. First of all, is don't be ashamed to pause and take time to collect your thoughts. I think there's a misconception that people have to speak immediately to be instantly knowledgeable. And it's not true. I think that people will appreciate that you actually take time to consider what you're going to say before speaking. So don't be afraid of pausing and collecting your thoughts a bit. The other thing is you can also use some set phrases that you prepare beforehand to help you feel more comfortable. If you feel like the pause is too long, so you could say something like, "Okay, I haven't thought about that before. You know, let me take a second to think about that before I respond." So when you learn a few of these set phrases, you can feel really confident in just giving yourself a few extra moments to prepare your answer.
To buy yourself a bit more time.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think at least for me in the past, sometimes I felt like I had the urge to just give an answer on the spot, but no
Hmm.
one is actually giving us that pressure. It's actually perfectly okay to say I don't know from time to time, and I think like you said, right, is sometimes people don't expect us to have all the answers on the spot, and it's perfectly okay to take our time to pause and to come back to them when we're ready.
Absolutely. And Aaron, I would say if anyone here who is listening is a team leader or running meetings in a multinational setting, one really good thing that they can do to avoid the situation is to just warn people in advance a bit. Don't put them on the spot because um, it's hard enough, even in your own native language, to answer spontaneous questions. But when you do that for someone who is speaking a second language, it really creates a lot of unnecessary pressure. So there are so many ways that we can assist each other to avoid these types of situations. And one of those is to give a bit of warning, to send out an agenda or a talking point, or just even tell the person for a few minutes in advance that you're going to ask them a question.
Let's talk about screw ups because not every communication goes according to plans. Sometimes you
Mm.
might have said something wrong and you wish you hadn't done that during that meeting.
Yeah.
What's a good comeback? How can people sort of save themselves from those situations? If you had said something wrong, said something that you shouldn't have said, how could they turn the situation around?
Yeah, I think being honest is important, like if you screw up and you say, hang on, I spoke too fast there, or I spoke before I had properly considered. Let me try that again. People appreciate honesty because, they're gonna see it. If you try and cover up and pretend that you didn't say something or cover up your mistake, okay, they'll see it anyway. So let's be honest and value the other person's intelligence as well. Um, but I think one way is just to try and avoid screw ups. by being more clarifying. Okay, so when we don't understand something, rather than just being afraid to ask and say, "Oh, I didn't understand," it's much better to do that than to continue your communication in the wrong direction. So I always advise people to clarify by paraphrasing what they've understood.
You mentioned about 45% of our communication comes from listening, right?
Mhm.
And so when we are having a conversation with someone, how do we know that it is successful? Because the receiving party might not tell you on, I guess, in your face that they're getting the message or you're being effective, right? What are some of the cues that people can observe to know that okay, yeah, they're being effective?
Mm. That's interesting because I think it's really cultural as well. I think some cultures will not be, if you just say to somebody, "Oh, do you understand?" Of course, they're not going to say, "No, I didn't understand." So you have to be really present and watching them, as I said earlier about the nonverbal cues and body language, facial expressions. Somebody's looking confused, but they're nodding their head up and down. Maybe they don't quite understand. So one way you can do it is to outright ask them, and but you don't have to say, "Do you understand?" You could say, "Am I being clear? Is everything clear so far? Would you like to ask me any questions?" The other way is to continuously summarize or rephrase what you've said. So don't assume that the first time you've said something, it's going to be understood. At the end of your speaking, do a little recap and rephrase using different words what you've just said. Then check again if that person has really got it.
I I like what you just said. Don't assume that the first time you say something, people are gonna understand.
Mhm.
Usually, when there's misunderstanding, it's never a one-party problem. It's usually both sides, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And it's not a bad thing when these miscommunication happen. I think we have to understand, like, you know, as we're working in multinational settings most of the time, we have to expect that there are so many different nuances in people's culture that affect how they speak. So it's better to be open and upfront, just asking, are you following me, or clarifying yourself?
Yeah. So you just gave an example of a question that we should avoid asking people. Do you
Mhm.
understand me? Or- so in a multinational setting, right? What are some of the big no-nos that you have come across, and are there any best practices that would you would normally suggest other people to follow in a multinational setting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best practices would be like best practice that we follow usually for any meeting is to give lots of advance notice about it. So sending out an agenda before your meeting with your talking points and letting people know if you want them to participate in something. So giving them that extra time to prepare is really important. And then, of course, at the beginning of your meeting, just outlining what you're going to talk about, but also establish some ground rules. Okay, so especially in a multinational setting, not everybody will be used to openly asking questions or waiting for a particular part of the meeting to ask questions. So just saying, okay, in today's meeting, um, I'm gonna talk about this, and then I'm gonna open up for questions. So please feel free. We welcome questions because some cultures people don't welcome questions. There's a hierarchy. So we want to be open about the way that we're going to run the meeting and say this is acceptable and this is how we're going to have it. And then, of course, throughout the meeting, just giving lots of opportunities for input, not only spoken, but maybe some written input as well. So at the end of the meeting, you could send out a summary and invite feedback through writing. again, people might not feel comfortable speaking openly in the meeting, and they might feel more comfortable giving feedback at the end. So just giving lots of different ways for people to participate that might not always be that they have to speak in front of a big group of people on the spot.
Yeah, very handy.
Mm.
Around building up confidence and how to speak up, and I tend to hear this a lot more from introverts or from females in particular about
Mm.
speaking up in front of a big audience, right? How could somebody, assuming that their first language might not be English, how could they build up their confidence and be able to speak up in front of a big group?
I think that confidence, it means something different for everyone. So for me, confidence is the self-belief that I can handle a situation. And I know that for a lot of women, it's really hard to speak up because being assertive can be seen as, being aggressive in some cultures. And if you don't feel like you have the permission to speak up freely, that can stop you. So if you don't speak English as a first language, I recommend building some tools and strategies that help you to speak up. So that might be looking at your meeting agenda, if you have that in advance, and thinking about and planning where you might want to interact. Okay. And preparing things that you might want to say first, and thinking about how you might participate. So, for example, I recommend like the piggyback, I call it the piggyback technique. So, for somebody who doesn't feel confident just putting their hand up first and giving their opinion, they can wait for a colleague to say something, and then they can start talking by supporting what the other person has said and agreeing or disagreeing with them. So, when you identify a few different ways that you can participate that feel comfortable with you, you can use these techniques and practice them first, like prepare them. Then you're going to be much more confident when you're in the real life setting.
And the best way, is there a good way to start this, I guess, small chat, or is because I read somewhere, I forgot whether you wrote it or someone else wrote it, we should try to avoid saying I think blah 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 blah, because we start a sentence where I think, it diminishes our confidence. I was wondering, in your experience, right, what if someone were to uh, chime in on an idea during a business setting, what's a better way to start these small chats?
Mm. I think it just so depends on the situation. When we use I think, we're kind of softening our entrance into the chat. So if you do that, it might be because you don't want to offend the other person, okay, because you're disagreeing with them. It depends on the impression that you want to give in your meeting. So doing that will soften your agreement or disagreement. If you want to be stronger and more assertive, you could say, I believe, or this is. So you can just start with a fact. But again, that can sound too strong in some cases. So I think you have to really be aware of the situation and the people in the room.
Because the reason I'm asking these questions is because I've also faced similar situations when I was, I guess, younger.
Mm.
I moved to Australia in my teen years. I was 18, 19. Yeah, obviously, I was doing quite well in Hong Kong, but I was never, like, compared to native English speakers, my English proficiency was not quite there. So
Mhm.
when I was put in front of smart speakers, fast speakers, I would tend to hold myself, and I would tend to not speak. So
Yeah.
and I assume a lot of people are also facing this situations. If I guess if their their first language is not English, or it's not whatever in whatever country that they're residing in, right? So in those situations, we talked about the preparation that is needed, and really thinking ahead, the agenda. What are the agenda items that we could help contribute in those dialogues, right? But in those heated debates, sometimes it's very hard to sort of weigh yourself in those conversations, right? Is there
Mm-mm-mm.
anything those people can do in those situations?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so in situations where people feel like they're going to be talked over or they don't feel confident, so one approach is try to be the first person to speak when something's open, okay, to get your voice in before anyone else. If that's not possible and there are people who are just talking over you, then I think that sometimes it's possible to interrupt if it's polite. And so you can use an assertive phrase in this case. So you can say, "Oh, may I speak here? Sorry to interrupt, but may I speak here? I have something to add on to that." Um, because we have to value ourselves, and if we're holding ourselves back from speaking in a meeting just because of the language, um, we're cutting ourselves short, really. So we need to give ourselves the best chance. And I've done this before as well in meetings in Italian. I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, you don't feel like you can keep up. But what I learned was that I have a voice, and just because my voice is not exactly the same as the native speaker in the language I'm using, I'm at the meeting for a reason. I have something valuable to share. So if if you don't feel comfortable interrupting, okay, you can try and talk to the leaders about that and say, look, you know, this situation's happening. I'm not getting the opportunity. So you need to take a more proactive stance, I think.
Mhm.
And that comes from mindset, right? It's the first point. Understanding that you have value to add.
Yeah. No, I think that's what you said is very profound. Just simply, the reason why we're at that meeting is because you also have something to contribute
Mm-hmm.
back to the meeting and the audience, and also what you said at the start of the conversation around some of the communication myths around what's effective and what's not effective, and just because someone is talking very fast or they're using a lot of big words does not necessarily mean that they are a better communicator. So I think it's good awareness to have when we're in this multinational business setting. Who can people learn from if they want to sort of brush up their communication? Do you have an idol? Do you have a role model?
Oh gosh. I mean, if I want to look at good speakers, I love watching, TED Talks. That's the classic. You have some amazing speakers there. Like, I think Amy Cuddy is one who I like to watch. She talks about using positive body language to be more assertive. Um, but I would say, like, find somebody who you see in real life often communicating. So there might be somebody who you look up to in a meeting and you go, "Wow, this person sounds great," or "This person always has a really good presence," and just copy them. Notice what they do, right? So what is it that you like about their communication style? Do they sound confident? What is it that makes them sound confident? Do they use I'm thinking actually now about somebody that I work with frequently, who I love her communication style because she's very empathetic. She always responds by acknowledging what the other person has said, and she's a fantastic listener. So I model myself a little bit off her, and I try to pick up things and repeat them the way that she communicates because I love her style. So, let's find people who are in our circle so that we can continuously learn and from them. Have you got anyone, Aaron, who you like who communicates well?
I would gotta say I would have to say it's probably the GM who hired me back in 2011. So
Uh-huh.
I got my first full time consulting job back in Asia. I was working in Sydney at the time, and he flew me to Melbourne and then flew me to Hong Kong for interviews. Probably one of the most empathetic leaders I've come across. Even my current manager at Microsoft, she's been great. So Microsoft's got a great culture. So we've got a framework called model coach care for all the manager. And actually, 2/3 of our performance management is around working with people and helping people to succeed. So that also helps, I think, in terms of driving that culture. So my current manager and the general manager who hired me almost 10 years ago has got incredibly high emotional intelligence. A big fan of the work from Daniel Goleman. So that's also how I got interested in leadership and a lot of one-on-one coaching. And so yeah, I would say these two people have had a lot of influences on how I communicate and how I try to empathize with other people. Obviously, I can't get it right in every single situation. But when I have time to pause, I will try to think, oh, what would he have done in this situation? What would he have said in this situation to make it better? And what could I have done differently to make it a better experience to the receiving party? For me, it's a progress. It's a lifelong progress to be made and to keep improving. Can't get it right all the time, like you said, and we can just. But I can. The better thing to do is to identify the situation, like you said, reflect on it, and think about what we could have done differently to make it a better experience for the receiver.
That's so right, Aaron. I love what you said about that. It's a continuous learning process. I mean, I'm not by any means a perfect communicator at all either. Because by the fact is that communicating is with people. So every person is different. And so therefore you have to continuously adapt and try to tailor your communication style to those who you're working with and speaking with. So there's no way that you can ever say, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm a great communicator now. I'm finished. So I really like your attitude to that. And I do think that you have a great communication style, very empathetic.
Thank you. So during my time in Sydney, and this company was undergoing acquisition. So I was working with a team of consultants, and one of them is a Korean woman. She was very quiet, so I wouldn't say we had a very intimate relationship, well, very close relationship at work. And when that acquisition happened, and I found out that they actually had to get rid of half of the team in the new organization. So she just pulled me aside into a conference room, and I didn't know what was coming. And the next thing I knew was she broke down in front of me. She started crying, tearing up, and then she told me that she got let go. And on the same day, her fiance also called off the wedding. So it was a terrible time for her. But that was one of the times where I was put on the spot, but I did not know how to react. All I did was I just gave her a hug and just said I'm really sorry to hear about that. But yeah, I really enjoy all your sharing today, and I think it's going to make a lot of differences in many people's lives. And just before we wrap up our podcast, though, and I asked this question to all the guests who have appeared on our show here, and mainly because one of the reasons why I started this podcast was really because of an experience I went through with my son, and I wanted to help spread more positivity around the world and help people become a better future self, right? So I just wanted to pass that stage back to you. If there's one thing that people could do differently to make our world a better place, in your profession, in your experience, what do you think that one thing should be?
Listen. For me is to listen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen openly with an open heart, an open mind. Don't always try to get your agenda. Try to think about the other person and put yourself in their shoes, empathize with them, and ask questions, just find out more from the other person. I think that if people listened more to each other in the world, it would just be such a better place, we're all connected. That's, if anything, has taught me in my life living in different countries. It's like language is, many people see it as a barrier, right? But we're all human at the end of the day. We all have the same emotions. Language stops us from being able to express it in the same way. Maybe. So when you are speaking to somebody who has a different mother tongue or a native language to you, just be aware that just because they're not expressing themselves in the way that you might expect something to be expressed, they still have the same emotion, the same feelings. So we need to treat them the same way and just be open-minded about that. Yeah.
Very well said. Thank you, Hannah. And one of the things I like to say is that if we could communicate with my 3-year-old son with limited vocabularies and limited language, right, we can really communicate to anyone on this planet.
Exactly, right? I have a 2-year-old daughter too, Erin, and mainly when I see that she's struggling to communicate, I just have to listen and think, okay, what is she telling me that she can't say through her words? So, what is her body language telling me? What is her emotion telling me? And just try to work through that. Yeah, having children is probably the biggest lesson you can have in communication.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, thank you so much for coming on our podcast again and sharing all the stories and insights about how to become a better communicator in a multinational setting. And I hope you keep well with your family. And I can't wait to meet you guys again in Hong Kong. Maybe sometime when travel opens up again, we'll travel to Italy and meet you guys.
Thanks, Erin. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's been a great chat.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.